Good afternoon.
Good afternoon.
I'm going to call this meeting to order. Our regular chair could not make it today, so we'll go through a roll call and then we'll appoint an acting chair for today's meeting. Clerk, call the roll, please.
Representatives, please state your name for the record when I call the taxing district you represent. City of DeKalb,
Bill Nicholas.
DeKalb Community Unit School District, DeKalb County,
Pete Steffen.
DeKalb Park District,
Amy Dahl.
DeKalb Township,
Jennifer Jeep Johnson.
Kishwaukee Community College,
Bob Johnson.
Public Member, Kishwaukee Water Reclamation District,
Mark Eddington.
DeKalb Public Library, DeKalb Township Road and Bridge District,
Craig Smith.
DeKalb County Forest Preserve. 7 present.
Thank you. And now we need to appoint an acting chair for today's meeting. Are there any nominations?
I would nominate Jenny Jeep Johnson to serve as the acting chair for today.
Is there a second?
I'll second it.
Pete? Discussion? No campaign speech? All right. All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Thank you. Madam
Okay.
Chair?
Welcome all. Looks like the first item of business is approval of our minutes. There are 3 dates that we will take into consideration in total. Is there a motion? Is there a discussion?
I'll move approval of all 3 minutes.
I'll second. Second. Any discussion?
I just had one comment, not that I was at this meeting, but February 1st, it looks like under C, the dates, the years are probably incorrect there.
Good catch. I say the time machine.
Ah.
Yeah.
Ruth, do you see what he's?
I don't have the minutes.
Okay.
in front of me.
Well,
Should be
we'll consider that a scrivener's error for the dates, and we'll correct the year under, looks like item C.
Should say 2018.
Yes, thank you very much.
Any other comments or considerations of the minutes? Okay, we have a motion and a second. All in favor?
Aye.
Any opposed? Okay, motion carries. That will bring us to public participation. And first up, we have Mary Ellen Shade.
Hi, I'm only here for clarification today. If anybody has any questions about the proposal regarding TIF for the Safe Passage property that we purchased recently. So I don't have anything to say unless there are questions.
Okay, and just for purposes of the recording, I'll repeat that she said she's offering herself up for clarification if anyone has questions on the safe passage, the proposed Safe Passage project. Thank you. Taryn Thaden?
I serve as a board member.
You know what, I'm sorry, can you please come to the podium up here?
Good afternoon. I am Taryn Thaden, and I reside at 115 Andreessen Court. I am currently a board member for Safe Passage. And I'm here as well as we are looking at the opportunity for funding for sanitary improvement on the 217 Franklin Street property that we just purchased, both the sanitary line and perhaps the demolition of the building, and for any questions that might arise as far as the particulars that we're planning on that property. So just here for anything if we've got questions for clarification.
Thank you. Mark Charvat?
Just want to take a moment, are we working here? Just want to take a moment to remind the board that in reference to, I think it's specifically item F, the discussion of projects and also action regarding the TIF projects. Recently, the city of DeKalb denied the petition for the Fisk Avenue project, and I think it would serve this board, along with each of the taxing bodies, much a positive aspect if you were to surplus this money. They would go to each of the taxing bodies. The school district did something pretty awesome recently where it took the surplus funds for money that was surplused at the end of the last cycle, and they took the money and utilized the money for bonds. And that was a great thing to do. The fact that this money was not approved for the Fisk Avenue project, I would like to see this board, it would benefit each of the board along with the city of DeKalb to surplus the money such that the money would go back into each of the coffers for each of the individual taxing districts. The plan was not to repurpose this money. The money needs to be surplused. Thank you.
Thank you. Mr. Jerry Smith?
Jerry Smith, Mayor, City of DeKalb. You know, we can discuss all the merits or the potential shortcomings of TIF all day long, all weekend long, really until we meet again next time as a joint review board. And personally, I appreciate the input. It's obviously that Mr. Sharvat, from his public comments over the past several weeks, several months, and mine are diametrically opposed to one another. Dave Kolars, who emailed me earlier in the week, said, you know, TIF is very, very confusing. I couldn't agree with you more, David. Personally, I appreciate the input, and yes, even the negative input about how tax increment financing has been used in the city of DeKalb. Now, over the past year, we've witnessed how the JRB should work. We've called out our past practices, and frankly, those practices were not as transparent as this public deserves. We've discussed ways that we can collaborate as taxing bodies to utilize TIF as it should be utilized, to improve our community in the long term. Let me repeat, in the long term. That's going to benefit all of us. As you know, this municipality's city council was unanimous last week in terminating the preliminary TIF agreement for the 145 Fisk proposal, as Mark suggested. We did this after giving it a positive stance several months before, because we liked the concept. But you know, we did the right thing a week ago. We did not recklessly throw $2.5 million towards a project that honestly may still have some potential. But we concurred with our city manager here, who had been charged with the responsibility to see if it made sense for the city. And when he determined that it simply was not a good use of these public TIF dollars, he said no. We said no. I commend him for that recommendation. Today, I commend Nicholas for stepping up and taking a good look at a property just down the street. I'm speaking of the Mooney parcel that could add to the visibility and the viability of our downtown area. Gosh, take a walk down Lincoln Highway. Cornerstone, Plaza DeKalb, Sundog, Hometown Sports, the groundbreaking planned next week at our treasured Egyptian Theater. I'd ask the Joint Review Board to join the city in the discussion about the merits of what we're attempting to do. I would respectfully ask you to visualize if you can, about how this community can improve itself in the weeks and months and years ahead. TIF can work, and it can work well. I sincerely believe, as the mayor of your city, I believe that the proposals that are going to be set forth before the Joint Review Board today make a lot of sense. Thank you.
Thank you. Those are the only registered speakers we have. Are there any others wishing to speak? Yes. Can you? Great. Thank you. Mr. James Mitchell?
Hello. My name is James Mitchell, 307 Manning Drive here in DeKalb. I'm here to ask, what's the fate of the 145 Fisk? Now, this building's been pulled for whatever reason. The TIF was pulled. The TIF does not exist anymore for that building. When TIF 3 runs on, it doesn't quite cover it. There is no more TIF money available for this. So I'm going to ask the city fathers and mothers and all that kind of stuff, what's the fate of this building? Is someone going to come in with deep pockets? Are they going to be ready to rock and roll and spend $7 million plus to get it up and on the ground? Off the ground, excuse me? I don't think so. I don't think there's anybody out there with those deep pockets. People right now are not breaking down the door of the owner, which I somewhat represent in DeKalb. They're not going to beat down the door to do this project. And TIF was available. Granted, the guys that were going for TIF had some kind of a problem, but that's the way it works. But I want to know, with this board and with the city council, Jerry, what are they going to do with that building? What is the city prepared to do with that building? Because that building more than likely has no fate, and its fate is to die and to rot into the ground. It's a nice, strong building. You all know it. You've been there. Many of you guys have been there. Many of you folks have been there. And I don't know what else to do with it. I don't know what else to try to promote it. I don't know who else to try to get to come in and build. Like I said, as the owner's representative, I work hard to do that. But I don't know. That's just the fate. I want to ask what its fate is. If you guys know, fine. If you don't, we'll keep trucking on. Thank you.
Thank you. Any other speakers? Okay, we'll move on to the presentation of the first quarter of FY19 TIF financials.
Thank you. The packet that you received has, and it's also online, a number of reports. I'm not going to walk you through all the reports, but I'm happy to answer any questions you may have about the first quarter's TIF expenditures. The reports you see talked about both TIF 1 and also TIF 2. TIF 1 is, as the line items go, is 260 dash lots of numbers, and TIF 2, 261. The total for spending in the quarter for the TIF program is $216,021.98. I think we can expect by the end of the second quarter, which will be after June, so it'll be at our July meeting, that there'll be some spending on the Egyptian project at that point and some other things to discuss. So it was a quiet quarter.
Bill, at one point you had shared, I believe, with the members of the JRB, a memo that you had written to staff.
Yes.
About how they were to
Yes.
track their time on
Yes.
TIF projects.
Yes,
is
they
that
have.
still in place, or is something different?
No, it's still in
happening?
place. And the tracking is happening. The people most involved in tracking time are Dan Olson and up to this point Dean Frieders, Ray Munch, and myself. And we, as you know from that memorandum, it laid pretty tight parameters around what could be claimed, and so we've been looking at that. And the hours, you saw there were two months worth when this budget was put together, and it was before my taking my position, the allocation for administrative expenses have been reduced from 800,000 to 100,000, and it was set up in the budget as a monthly, a regular monthly transfer to the general fund of $8,333 a month. Looking at the first 2 months, I would say we probably hit that. There was a lot of administrative TIF discussion, but in the field, not too much happening. We'll track it, and if we have to adjust that downward or upward, my inclination is to see where we're going. We can make an adjustment after the next month and then report that in the second quarter.
So right now, what's being transferred into the general fund is simply the budgeted amount.
Yeah, that
each
was the
month.
way the
And
budget
then-
was set
okay.
up, right. And
And
now
then-
that I've had a chance to track the hours, and I've looked at the hour report wasn't here, but I'm happy to make that available to you. We're about on that mark for January and February. I think we'll look at April. I think maybe, well, things are going to pick up. You know, if this is a theoretical question, maybe I might have started at 7,500. So there's probably a difference in the March. We haven't seen the final March numbers yet, but
Okay,
yeah. So we're watching it.
thank you.
I just had a question on
Yes,
the actual budget.
Yep.
It's actually the footnotes report, page 1 of 3.
Right.
Under the financial services, I think there's 4 items listed there: the annual audit, the TIF compliance audit, and the TIF forensic audit, which are kind of self-explanatory. What would the third-party financial review involve?
Where are you, Pete?
Page 1 of 3 on the footnotes report.
Okay.
Here.
Right up the top.
And the financial services, just that third-party review for 13.5, just curious what that is on top of the 3 audits that are listed.
Well, Ray set that budget entry up. Do you remember what that was, Ray?
If I'm recalling correctly, that's money that's budgeted for analysis of projects that come forward to gauge potential return on investment and financial feasibility. So that's built in there for potential projects that may come forward in the future.
Okay. For the year.
Correct.
Thank you.
Welcome. That's all I have.
Discussion? Additional questions?
The only question I have is procedural. Is this something that JRB would vote on approving these once a year, but not at our quarterly meetings? Is that correct? And I don't know that you necessarily know that, but.
My understanding is that we don't so much approve them as accept them, and I don't know that's something that we need to do at our quarterly meetings, but
The way we set them up was to give you a chance to review them, ask questions as we've done today, and if you have any critique you'd like to offer, fine, and you did. That was very appropriate.
so there's no
There-
action.
Okay.
The
that's
JRB doesn't
taken.
have the statutory responsibility to approve.
Okay, thank you.
With no further discussion, we will move to the next item, which is discussion of TIF 1 projects.
All right, so I took a little time to walk you through in a general way projects that are underway or to be underway. Mayor Smith referred to the Egyptian Theater. The groundbreaking is coming up. It's about 90 years to the day that the first groundbreaking occurred in 1929. And so the full construction plans are not yet complete, I understand. I went to the Egyptian Theater board meeting this week, and the report was that they're close. When they're done, then the general contractor shops them to various trades and subcontractors, and will grind out a final not to exceed price, or they may call it different, it might be the project price in their contract with the general contractor. And then, according to our agreement with the Egyptian Theater Corporation, LLC, before our $2.5 million is put on the table, we have to see that whatever that project price is in line with actual funds pledged or received, and including ours. So if it's $4 million as originally estimated, there's a combination of $2.5 million in city TIF money and cash and hard pledges, something in writing from responsible persons with assets that can be identified. And so we have yet to see that. That's not yet ready, and we don't know what the price is going to be. But I made it clear that we'll be looking for that. That's according to our contract. Actually, keep going. Hometown Restaurant, you've probably noticed, the work is in progress, moving along. Others have spoken to the 145 Fisk project. The Mooney property, which we'll come back to, is now under contract for due diligence period. The Shodine property on West Lincoln Highway west of First Street, which was at one point called University Park Commons, in a development plan that the council had reviewed back in 2016. It's sitting there. We've had just some conversation with the development company. No development plan or incentive initiative is under review at this point. There's been interest in McCabe's. As some of you know, there's been some media coverage of the interest of the two owners, the brothers who own the property, to sell it to the right buyer for compatible retail downtown. The house, likewise, is of interest to some people. We've had some discussion in both cases with out-of-town commercial retail developers. It hasn't led to any formal proposal as yet. Safe Passage has a contract to purchase the DeKalb Clinic, or has it been purchased? It has been purchased. On Franklin Street is working on conceptual plans and working with the Kishwaukee Water Reclamation District about a pretty good size sanitary sewer running right down the middle of the property there. Was that there when they first built the original, before they put the addition on, or was that? You don't know.
That's our guess, is that was there before they put the building.
Okay, thank you.
I think the city actually owned the sanitary sewer at that point in time.
Oh. Architectural Improvement Program. This is a $50,000 a year program that the council has supported for a number of years in our annual budget, and that money, some of you have followed the program through the years, gets dedicated to facade improvement projects, focusing on such things as ADA compliance and so forth. And this year we have had two projects come before the council. Both have been approved for a total of $15,750. And we have right now 3 interested parties, each separate, which are interested in some facade improvement projects, and we'll be eventually bringing those before the council if they materialize. So that's just sort of a run through the projects that are underway or have promise of getting underway. I don't know if you want to.
For purposes of clarification of the projects that you just mentioned, you said some have not put forth formal proposals.
Yeah.
And some
So what
have.
happens is, may I?
Yes, of course.
So what happens is I get a call. Do you have a TIF program? Yes, we do. What are the criteria? There's some things I can explain on the phone, and then we usually send something along. And then we usually get a follow-up saying, I'm interested in the property at X in your TIF district. I've seen the map. It looks like this is in a TIF. And after confirmation, they say, if I give you a takeoff, can you identify those tasks that are TIF eligible? We can do that. But we have a lot of caveats saying, you know, we're not promising that this money will be there. It has to be considered by the council, and ultimately it has to be awarded, and there's a public process for that. But what they're trying to do is see if it's worth talking to us or moving down the road to another town. And what we're trying to do is give them enough information to show that we're interested. We're sort of open for business, but there are levels of approval and review that will have to occur. So I noted 2 of them here in the downtown area, the house and McCabe's, and I've only mentioned enough which will not embarrass the owners in this case. They've already been in the public with their interest in some redevelopment, rehab. So that's a quick run through. I want to address, after, if you have some more discussion, fine, but address some of the questions, and also maybe just refine the proposal that I put in the background at the appropriate time.
Okay. Let's see if there are any questions or discussion points on the descriptions we've received. So you'd like to flesh out?
If I may,
one-
just open it up for discussion, but just have a few comments, if I may.
Sure.
Let me just back up for a minute. Is this the kind of project reporting you want? Do you want more detail, less detail? This is our first time. We're sort of feeling our way through this process, and I'm happy to give you whatever you need. Is that about right? Okay. Well, yeah, I stuck my neck out and I made a proposal, and for all the right reasons, it's generated some conversation, and I hope we'll have some conversation here today. The context is this. Just in the last 4 or 5 months, there have been some major TIF funding decisions made. Some have affected all taxing bodies. In fact, all have to one extent or another. We know about surplus distributions that have occurred according to agreements that have been made. The TIF 1 agreement, the revenue sharing agreement from 2007, whose first year was 2011, calls for the 50% distribution of the increment for the year in TIF 1, and that has been going along. For 2018, the allocation was about $2.6 million. And then, you know, there was a reference earlier tonight or today to the conversation in November and December involving the JRB, the City Council, the whole community about what to do about TIF 2 incremental funds that had accrued in the city's TIF fund, with the expectation that TIF 2 was soon to come to an end. And some projects were identified, which we'll come back to. And then there was a TIF distribution early in January, $5,658,295 were distributed. There's going to be one more TIF 2 distribution of $1,786,382, which will represent funds that had been levied and are payable in 2019, not yet ready to be dispersed, but that is coming your way. So the total on TIF 2 was $7,444,000, and when you add TIF 1 and TIF 2, the total distribution to other taxing bodies was $10,058,527. So that is either done or will soon be done with respect to the TIF 2 2018 distribution, or 19, excuse me. Okay, so money is out there. It's been distributed. After the council's decision on Monday night, there is a question about what to do about the $2.5 million, which brings us back to center. And I had proposed that much of that be dedicated toward the rehabilitation, redevelopment of the property that we've referred to as the Mooney property at 4th and Locust. There are a couple of reasons for that. First of all, the possible redevelopment of that parcel is not a new concept. It's been unoccupied for business purposes for going on 10 years. Just in the last couple of months, there have been 2 lead editorials in the Daily Chronicle about what's going to happen with the Mooney property, what's the next step, why isn't there a next step, and so forth. The interesting thing is what might happen if it was redeveloped, and it's important to look at what the benefit would be, obviously. If I can dig it up here, that's too many pages. For today's meeting, Dan Olson and I collaborated on coming up with what the EAV is now and what it potentially could be if the proposed project that Mr. Pappas has brought forward were to be vetted and ultimately approved by the council. So that the EAV, and these are 2017 numbers, which were available to us. The EAV of the combined Mooney properties, there's a good city block there. There are 5 or 6 parcels involved, one big one and a number of others. So it stretches from Locust up to Oak and from 4th more than halfway toward 5th. It's just under 300,000, which is the EAV. So the total taxes in 2017 were just about $36,000. So it has an EAV. It's been on the tax rolls. It's been adjusted a number of times downward, $36,000 in taxes. So let's, for the sake of discussion, just say that the almost $14 million project were to happen, and it would result in a value like that. And in establishing the value, the township assessor would have to consider a number of things, but the actual price, which would be shown on city permits and so forth, would be a key determining factor in that. So let's divide that by 3, and we come to about 4.6 million for EAV versus 300,000. So we've got about a 16 times factor here in terms of potential taxes. So it would rise from the 36,000 to be distributed through the TIF program a number of ways, proportionally, to $576,275, more or less. It's a major improvement in terms of the payout, if you will, the return on equity, the return on investment for all of the local taxing bodies. So whether it stayed in the TIF for the life of the TIF or came out of the TIF instantaneously as soon as it was done and the final occupancy permits were issued and the grading was done, the paving was done, the trees were planted and all the rest of that, there's going to be a very healthy improvement in the EAV. So that is economically a driver behind my proposal to look at that. If the money was distributed, it could buy down some debt, 2.7 or 2.5 million, depending on the situation in each of the local taxing bodies. Now, so how do you calculate the debt? It's a good thing to pay down debt. You don't like to carry any debt. Is that right, Pete?
Correct.
Yes, okay. If you can. And we at the city would like to do that if we could. But so let's say the debt, I don't know what your average rate is in terms of interest on your debt, 3, 4?
Say 3.5.
3.5. And you could look at it this way. Right now, that's a cost to you. If you were to buy it down, that's a 3.5% savings to you, right? So what we're seeing here is a possibility of maybe a 9% increase or a 9% return on investment over time. So it's a difference. It's something to consider. Each taxing body could consider if that's the best course for them, but it's not insignificant, and in some cases, it might be beyond any savings that might be achieved through buying down debt. It really depends on the debt and what the situation of each taxing body is. So that's just a consideration. That's the economics of it all. Now, what about the legalities of it all? The $2.5 million is right now in TIF 1. Remember, that was in TIF 2, and it was ported to TIF 1. It's in TIF 1. There is no statutory obligation for the city to automatically return that to the taxing bodies. I think you are well aware. It can just sit in TIF 1. It can sit there for the life of TIF 1, which we will talk about on our agenda today. We're looking at basically 2 more years for TIF 1, and particularly if ultimately the council would have to review this and vote on it. But we had a lot of discussion in the last couple meetings of the JRB in special session, and the JRB seemed to be very interested in the possibility of closing down TIF 1 year early and surplusing that amount. So instead of going to 2022, we go to 2021. 2021's increment being payable in 2022 rather than 2022's increment being payable in 2023. And so we've got 2 more years basically, and that's the time. If we're to do what all of you have said is what you want to do, you want to redevelop, you want to rehabilitate, you want to increase the EAV and the tax producing capacity of property within the TIF, which is now being compressed in terms of acreage and parcels, then the thing to do is, in my opinion, consistent with that, is to seek out and support those property redevelopments that will generate the most potential property tax over the future. I guess that's a long way of saying that I do support the possibility of getting behind the redevelopment of the Mooney property, and I will want to hear your thoughts on that, and also the use of that $2.5 million to incent the development of that property. Thank you.
Questions, discussion? We've sort of slipped into.
Yeah, I didn't see how I could segue. I'm sorry.
That's
I jumped
okay.
ahead.
We're sort of fusing into the next item, which, although it says action regarding TIF 1 increment, although I don't know
That is later, yeah.
Okay, so let's stick with discussion on everything we just heard.
I think you started to have an explanation of the legality of taking basically what you're proposing is to take the funds from the $2.5 million from FISC, and instead of surplusing that, using that for these potential projects, which would include the Mooney property and Safe Passage. Can you back up just a little bit and explain clearly what the law says and how that's legal?
There's nothing in the TIF Act that says that money ported from one TIF to another has to be ported back, and the council has the authority to invest it, to put it in property redevelopment. You can only sit on it for 3 years. We learned that at the end of last calendar year. So I'm not recommending that we do that. Looking that we put it to work, and TIF 1 is ending sooner than we will probably realize. I mean, it's going to come very quickly. So there is no obligation to report it back or to surplus it. It could be eventually ported into TIF 3. Now here's something, and maybe people in the audience aren't aware of this. There is a TIF 3, as you know. This board supported in general the creation of it. TIF 3 right now, and Jeff is watching. Can you want to throw up that map? There you go. Well, that's maybe hard to read. So TIF 3 is that hatched line. It looks like an amoeba that's running east-west over mostly Lincoln Highway and a couple blocks either way of Lincoln Highway, north or south. The green is TIF 1, the yellow is TIF 3. Oh, excuse me, TIF 2. TIF 3 is the hatched area, forgive me.
And it's no longer proposed, correct? It is in existence.
It is.
So
It exists, but it was created after the first of the year. So here's how, we've met with the DeKalb County Clerk. Here's how this plays out. For this year, no money gets into the TIF 3 fund. It is accruing increment, which is dispersed after January 1st at the usual times. The county clerk will get that in motion. I think that's a couple times in 2020 then. It's almost like the old paper, rock, scissors game. So TIF 3 is the paper over the TIF 1 rock. And this year, the county is allowing TIF 1 to bleed through, if you will. So it's the area in TIF 3 is acting as if it was still in TIF 1. Next year, you can only have one TIF on a parcel at a time. So TIF 3 will rule in that hatched area. And the base year for increment is going to be this year. So any energy that was in TIF 1 for whether it's the Mooney property or anywhere else is dissipated, and we're starting over. And as you saw the projections when we last met, the total TIF revenue in TIF 3 starting next year is estimated to be not much more than $500,000. So that doesn't develop Mooney property. It doesn't, it might pay for the demolition and part of the remediation of the environmental issues. It's not going to be enough of an incentive to get that going. Hence, the timing this year, it makes some sense that TIF 1, with that ported money, gets to work. That's why I proposed it now. It made sense to me to do it now rather than wait 3 months and bring it back to you again. Construction season would be more than half over at that point. Not likely the demolition or the remediation would be done. And then we're into the new TIF.
I do have a statement, if you'll indulge me here. Both Gary Hansen and Mark Petrowski, due to schedule conflicts, were not able to make the meeting, but I was asked to make this statement. State's Attorney Rick Amato and DeKalb County Board Chairman Mark Petrowski had an opportunity to talk about the recent TIF discussions that have been in the paper and discussed by the City Council. The forensic audit, as Bill mentioned, is beginning soon and is focusing on all the City of DeKalb TIF-related activities from January 1st, 2009 through December 31st, 2018. All recent approval of expenditures, including the approvals made prior to the end of 2018, will be reviewed as part of this audit. It is the hope of all of us that upon the completion of the audit, our community's faith in taxing procedures and local governmental decisions are restored. In terms of individual decisions and how the TIF money is spent, that has always been a City of DeKalb function and continues to be so. While other taxing bodies can offer opinions, it is the decision of the DeKalb City Council. We have made a previous statement about the funds being returned to taxing bodies and would still desire that, but acknowledge the city can make their own decision and pursue other projects. Subsequent to this and some discussions, I think there's been a compromise thrown out there that the county would support the Moody project, provided that once that project is completed, however long it may take, that is returned to the tax rolls upon completion of that project rather than riding out through the entire duration of the TIF. So that's something, a compromise the county would like to throw out there in lieu of, I don't know if it was promised or the discussion that had taken place about that would eventually be rebated back to the tax or surplus back to the taxing district.
Bob, any questions?
Speaking for Kish College, the president and I have talked a little in our board about this, and our view is, as Bill commented, long-term is more important than short-term. We could find a use for funds short-term, but the kind of return that it appears could be coming if this project comes to fruition and is actually built and on the tax rolls would be much better for our college and maybe most of the taxing bodies long-term. So we would support, in terms of whether sooner it's back on the tax rolls, if the owner is agreeable to that, that'd be great. But the project, it looks well-founded from what I've read in the newspaper. It looks like a real opportunity to enhance our communities.
With respect to the sanitary district, just some back of the envelope calculations. You know, we're a user fee mostly based revenue. That's how we get our revenue. And just the Mooney property as it is now is really providing us no revenue, or very, very small. And this, as it's outlined here, would probably be between $20,000 and $25,000 a year in user fees. We're a high fixed cost operation, so that would be, you know, a huge benefit for us.
The town board has not had an opportunity to consider this or have discussion on it, on the particular project that we're discussing. But I will say that in terms of the funds, given that we had already lent approval or recommended approval of the prior fund usage, nobody was anticipating these funds coming back to the taxing bodies. So I really can't speak on behalf of my board on this particular project, but math-wise, it certainly wasn't something we anticipated for our budget. I have a couple of questions, but I don't know if anybody else wants to make.
The only question I would bring is,
Can you move your?
sorry, the Mooney project, will that then stay in TIF 1 as a project? And it won't be moved to TIF 3?
And no, we don't have any choice. It will become TIF 3.
So then
Yeah.
the end result would be that we would have to wait for our full tax dollars back out of that project until the end of TIF 3?
No.
Not at the end of TIF
No,
1?
I mean, the council can put any conditions it wants on it. In years past, in fact, I don't know, maybe someone else knows of a project where the proponents haven't asked for, a long-term deal. But there is a way, and as you know, like we just went through the Egyptian theater's permanent long-term development agreement, and it was a 30-year promissory note. That can still be done. Banks do it every day. It can still be done separately. It's an agreement. It's a contract between the city and a particular entity. But whether it's in the TIF or not, that's something that the council can rule on. And obviously we'd have to consider what we've been discussing here today. But let me ask this, we have a few people absent here today, but would it be the interest of this body to support a redevelopment project there with possibly the condition that upon completion at some period, and here's more of the discussion maybe, whether it's 5 years or less or whatever it is, that it would be removed from the TIF 3. Now, just so you know, that does make a difference in what increment can be accrued in TIF 3. However, I will quickly add, if the objective is to renovate and redevelop that anchor site in our downtown area, mission accomplished upon occupancy. And in that small TIF, which is TIF 3, is generating $500,000 a year. There are not going to be similar projects like that. So that becomes a series of small projects every year, which light up a block maybe, but don't redevelop the block. This is, at least of what's been identified from property owners and developers in the last years, recent years, this is it. This is a big one.
So let's just unpack a little bit.
Mm-hmm.
The Mooney property will be in TIF 3 or it falls within
It's officially in
TIF
TIF 3 now, but as far as the collection of increment is concerned, it's collecting for dispersal next year. It's not getting any money yet.
Okay, but the project money would come from money that has been ported to TIF 1?
Yes.
At which point next year, when TIF 3 becomes active and starts
Mhm.
collecting,
It can be put in there.
okay, and TIF 1
Mhm.
then would fall
Mhm.
off, TIF 3
Mhm.
becomes the ruling TIF
Yeah.
for that property?
We're not trying to do a shell game here. Well, TIF 3 this year, TIF 1 next year.
Yeah.
There won't be anything more to port.
Right.
It'll all be spent.
Further discussion?
You looked like you were going to say something.
No, I'll wait.
I think that, I guess, again, a procedural question about the Mooney property coming out of the TIF. Is that something that the council would consider prior to authorizing the TIF? Is it something, or the TIF use of TIF dollars towards that project? Is that something, and I guess I would also, I know that none of us have really had a chance to take it back to our
No,
boards to have that
and the council
conversation,
hasn't had a
but how-
chance. I haven't had a chance to present to them. I'd like to take it to them now that this has been out in the public domain. I think it's only fair that they have a chance to
Mhm.
weigh in on this as a consideration, not for an action agenda, but to give further direction both to you and to me, and the further conversation we'll have with the developer.
So I know that between the city and the developer, there are clearly mechanisms that can be built in place for opportunity to remove from the TIF
Mhm.
after a certain period,
Mhm.
et cetera. For our purposes, I don't know that there's a mechanism if we make the recommendation with a caveat like the county has expressed it would be interested in. I don't know that there's an easy mechanism in place for us to hold that, hold the city to that. So that's something I think we need to consider as well, is if we make the recommendation or I don't know that we're prepared to make an official recommendation given that we haven't discussed it with our boards, but when it comes time, I think we also need to contemplate, if it's 5 years down the road, and we expect that comes out and starts being collected, what happens at that point is something that we will need to have an ability to say, based on our recommendation, we expected
Right.
that to come out and.
So maybe what I should ask is, would you be willing to go back to your boards, your respective policymaking bodies, and raise this as a conversation so that we can then exchange information? In the meantime, I will be bringing what I have to the DeKalb City Council for their consideration.
I think it's important, I think as Pete referred to, I think most of us have had conversation that we don't want to be evaluating specific projects
Mhm.
as our entities. That's not the charge of most of us. It's, it's not what we do at the Park District,
Okay.
and that's not our charge. But having conversation about but it does have a financial impact on our budget and our ability to do projects. And so
Mhm.
at that level, having that conversation with our boards, I think, is helpful.
Mhm.
Having conversations about the merits of any specific project, I think are, in my opinion, are beyond the scope of what we would do. And I think that's what Mark and Gary had sent Pete to tell us.
And you stated it much more eloquently than I did.
You tell Gary, Mark that then.
I would exactly second that.
One more question. Many of the projects we look at in the Kish district, which covers
Mhm.
parts of 7 or 8 counties, are tax abatements requested by developers. Is that on the table here?
No. Tax abatements in TIF districts are very problematic because we're hitting you from two sides. It's not really, I think that is very problematic.
And if I'm not mistaken, if it falls within the enterprise zone, now there's an agreement in place already for large-scale projects that would not be on any one
Mhm.
entity, is that correct?
Mhm. Yes.
So it's, if I'm hearing correctly, it sounds like there was consensus among us that we are willing to go back and have
Mhm.
further discussion with
Mhm.
our boards so that we can, I guess, come back.
Well, I guess that's kind of the question. Is that something, I mean, we meet on a quarterly basis as a JRB, and I think, just being careful about, we don't want to go back to what we were doing a few months ago where we were meeting on a fairly regular basis and, quite frankly, occupying time from our respective taxing bodies where we need to focus on the business of our taxing bodies. So,
Well, we appreciate the time that everybody's been putting in. I think you appreciate the opportunity to weigh in on these as well. This is arguably the largest redevelopment project we can imagine as we all sit here. Maybe there's another. I'd like to hear what it is. But this is probably it, at least as far as our TIF program is concerned. There may be others outside of this that in the Antigua North area and so forth, but that'll be other additional players, not other players necessarily, but additional players, other sources of income. It's not tax increment financing. So seems that it's a good topic right now. It's a hot topic. Maybe we ought to dig in and work our way through it. I'll add again, this is a topic that the council has been aware of, but not had a chance to weigh in as a body, and I look forward to that opportunity to discuss it with them.
So to follow up, I guess, Jenny was indicating that, there seemed to be a consensus to go back to our taxing bodies, but is that then we would be having those discussions in public meetings there? Would we then be meeting as a JRB or simply, sending you minutes of our meeting and because they're public meetings? I guess that's the kind of the logistical
Let me make a
question.
suggestion. I intend to
Sure.
bring this to the council on the May 13th agenda as a consideration. Lay it all out, let the council begin the discussion of it. We will, of course, want to know what you're thinking. I don't think it's it's up to you. If you don't want to have a meeting, we don't have a meeting, but I think at some point it would be good to have a meeting once all of the other taxing bodies have discussed this at some length.
Well,
It should probably be the end of May or early June.
if I'm understanding this correctly, I think in most of our minds, the main question was whether or not the city had a duty to surplus the funds out if it wasn't being allocated to the project that was identified before. It sounds to me that you've answered that question for
There's no
yourself.
legal duty to do that.
Okay, so that then leaves it squarely within the purview of the city to decide what projects to
Yes.
allocate it to.
Yeah.
And while we can all go back and have conversations with our respective boards, it doesn't seem to me that there's any express action on behalf of the JRB that is required
Correct.
in order for you to move forward with the council.
That's correct, but I think I can speak for the council in saying that they'd like to know what you think. That's
Okay.
the new approach we all committed ourselves to take, and I'm the agent for that.
And I suppose the question then is just, do we have to have a meeting in order to do that? Or
Not necessarily.
once we can, if there are any major concerns, I assume that if we have questions along the way or as our boards present them, you will be available
Yes.
to offer clarifying information.
A letter from respective CEOs, chairs of the board, whatever, to the mayor maybe, to indicate the sense of their body, that would be welcome at some point.
And I do know that we did build in, if I'm not incorrect, that we are able to call meetings on more than a quarterly basis if necessary.
Yes.
So we have that ability as we proceed forward. If it seems like, no, we all need to get back in a room together, we can make that happen as well.
Could I suggest then that in that vein of a letter, that perhaps you put together some bullet points for us to discuss, so we don't miss anything with our boards?
Okay.
And we could certainly on our end review that and draft a letter back to this, to the mayor, to the city council.
That's a good idea. Is that agreeable?
I think that sounds like a great
Thank
idea.
you. I'll get that out next week. Or sooner. Do you want it sooner? When's your,
It's Friday, so next week will be fine.
tomorrow? I could do it. All right.
And if I'm not mistaken, that was the action item that you had listed was, or is there another action item you're looking for?
The last piece was, this is another thing that the council hasn't had a chance to talk about, but the JRB certainly has, and that's what we want to do with the question, do we have an IGA and a surplus arrangement with TIF 3, or do we close TIF 1 a year early, which came, as we discussed for a couple of meetings, in terms of arithmetic, to about the same number. And the sense of the body, correct me if I'm wrong, was you like the idea of getting it sooner in one lump than later, over 16 years and or longer. So if that you still feel that way, maybe you've had some more discussion with your various boards. I remember the Jamie Craven had taken it back to his board and it indicated there was interest in that. That was a preference. I just wanted to hear from you. If you're still favoring that, I will take it to the council and we'll move through consideration to some action on that point.
I think that would be the county's position to end TIF 1 early.
Our position hasn't changed on that.
Yep, same here.
Okay.
The Park District's position
Okay.
has not changed.
All right.
And I
Go
definitely know we prefer to not have any surplus agreement for TIF 3.
As an exchange, correct.
As an
Correct.
Thank you.
And that's all that we
That's all I have.
have. Our next meeting that we have for our quarterly basis would be July 26, 2019, but obviously we'll stay
see.
tuned on, if a need arises to reconvene prior to that. Without any other considerations, we need a motion to adjourn, please.
So moved.
Second? Second by Craig. All in favor?
Aye.
Aye. Any opposed? Okay, motion adjourned.